Cal Dover was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. He was 34 years old, lived alone on a small property at the edge of town, and liked it that way. His house was nothing special, a little worn around the edges, with a garden out back and a wooden porch that creaked when you stepped on it. He grew tomatoes and beans in the summer, fixed old radios in the winter, and mostly kept to himself. The town of Grover's Mill was quiet, and that suited him just fine. Cal had spent 5 years as an army medic before coming home. He had seen enough noise and chaos overseas to last him several lifetimes. When he came back, he did not want parades or handshakes or long conversations at the diner. He wanted silence, and he found it on that little patch of land outside of town. His neighbors respected the distance he kept. His mail was mostly bills and seed catalogs. That was how he liked things. So when he walked out to his garden on a cold Tuesday morning and found something lying near the tree line, he did not panic. He stood there, coffee mug in hand, and looked at it with the same quiet expression he brought to most things in his life. It was a scroll of some kind. Small, maybe the length of his forearm, and rolled up tight. The outside was a dark, reddish-brown color, and it looked like leather, but not any leather Cal had ever seen before. It was too smooth in some places and too rough in others, like skin that had grown without any plan to it. The scroll was tied shut with something that looked like a vine, except no vine in any forest around Grover's Mill was that dark or that twisted, and the edges were singed, as if whatever made this had done so near a great heat. Cal set down his coffee mug on a fence post and crouched near it. He did not touch it right away. He was a careful man by nature and by training. He looked at the ground around it first. The grass was slightly pressed down, as if something small had landed or rested there. There were no footprints a human would leave. There were, however, a few shallow marks in the soft soil near the trees, small, three-pronged, like a large bird might leave, except deeper at the front, as if whatever made them had claws rather than toes. He picked up the scroll after a minute and turned it over in his hands. It was warm. Not warm like something left in the sun, warm like something alive. He pulled loose the vine-like tie and unrolled it carefully. The inside was pale and smooth, and on it were words written in a rough, unsteady hand. The letters were large, like a child learning to write. Some were backwards. Some were the right shape but the wrong size. But they were readable, and Cal read them slowly, once, and then again. I am small. They want to take me. The big ones say humans are nothing. You are near. Please. Hatch name, Emery. Cal stayed crouched on the ground for a long moment. The morning air was cold and still. A crow called somewhere in the trees. He looked at the scroll again, at the small claw marks on its edges where something had gripped it tight while writing. He looked at the marks in the soil. He looked at the tree line, dark and quiet in the early light. His first thought was that it was a prank. Kids in town had done stranger things for a laugh. But then he looked at the material of the scroll again, and something in the back of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through things far worse than a strange morning in his garden, told him this was not a joke. The scroll was real in a way he could not explain. The warmth of it had not faded. And whatever had made those marks in the soil was not a kid in sneakers. He rolled the scroll back up and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He picked up his coffee mug and went inside. He made breakfast like normal. He did not call anyone. He did not go back outside to look at the tree line again. He simply waited, because that was what a smart man did when he did not yet understand what he was dealing with. The day passed slow and ordinary. He fixed the dial on an old AM radio, ate a sandwich at noon, read for a while in the afternoon. When dusk came, he went out to the porch and sat in his chair and watched the sky go dark over the trees. He had the scroll in his pocket the whole time. He took it out once and held it and felt the warmth still there, faint but real, and then he put it away again. Around 9 in the evening, when the dark was full and the stars were out and the wind had dropped to almost nothing, he heard something at the back door. Not a knock exactly. More like a scratch. Small, careful, low down on the door, like whatever was doing it was not tall enough to reach the handle. It came 3 times, then stopped. Then once more, softer. Cal set down his book. He did not reach for anything, did not arm himself, did not move fast. He walked to the back door the same way he walked everywhere, steady and unhurried. He put his hand on the knob and turned it and opened the door. The creature on his back step was about the size of a large cat. Its scales were dark blue, almost black in the low light, and they caught what little glow came from the kitchen behind him and shimmered faintly. Its wings were folded tight against its body, pressed flat like it was trying to make itself smaller than it already was. Its eyes were amber, a deep, warm amber, like old honey held up to the sun, and they were wide open, looking up at him with an expression that Cal recognized without needing any translation. It was afraid, and it was hoping. Cal looked at it for a moment. It looked back at him. The night was quiet around them both. Then he stepped to one side and held the door open wider and said, in a plain and steady voice, "Come in, then." The creature hesitated for just a second. Then it stepped through the door on careful, silent feet, and Cal closed it behind them both. The creature sat in the middle of Cal's kitchen floor and looked around at everything with those wide amber eyes. It turned its head slowly, taking in the counters and the overhead light and the half-fixed radio sitting on the table. Its nostrils flared. Its wings shifted slightly against its back, then settled again. It did not move toward anything. It simply looked, the way a careful child looks at an unfamiliar room before deciding if it is safe. Cal filled a bowl with water and set it on the floor a few feet away. He did not move toward the creature. He set the bowl down and stepped back and waited. After a moment, the creature walked to it on quiet, clawed feet and drank. Not greedily, slowly, with care, watching him over the rim of the bowl between each drink. When it was done, it stepped back and sat down again and looked at him. "Emery," Cal said, keeping his voice low and steady. "That your name?" The creature's ears, small, flat things pressed close to its skull, moved forward at the sound. It blinked once. Then, slowly, it dipped its head down and back up. A nod. Small and careful, but a nod. Cal pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down so he was closer to its level. "Okay," he said. "I'm Cal. You're safe here tonight." The word safe seemed to do something. The creature's whole body shifted. Not much, just a small releasing of tension in the wings, a slight lowering of the head. It had been holding itself very tight, Cal realized, the way a person holds themselves when they are braced for something bad. And now, just a little, it was letting go. Over the next several days, Cal learned things slowly and carefully, the way he had always learned things that mattered. Emery was not an animal. That much was clear from the first hour. She watched him with intelligence, tracked his movements with understanding, and responded to words and gestures in ways that showed she was not just reacting, she was thinking. When he pointed to the window and said, "Outside," she understood he was asking if anyone had followed her. She shook her head. When he held up the scroll and looked at her, she touched it with one claw and then touched her own chest. "I made this. I sent this." Her wing was hurt. Cal noticed it on the second morning, when the light was better and she let him closer. There was a tear near the top joint, the thin membrane split about 2 inches, with dried dark blood along the edges. It looked a few days old. He got out his old medic kit without making a fuss about it and cleaned the wound with care. Emery held very still while he worked. She made no sound. But her eyes never left his hands, and when he was done and sat back she looked at the bandaged wing for a long time, then looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Something that had been guarded became slightly less so. She began to communicate more as the days passed. She could not speak, not in any human language, but she had been listening to humans for a long time before she found Cal. She understood more than she could express. She drew pictures in the dust on the floor, in the margins of old newspapers, on any surface Cal gave her. A mountain range, tall and jagged, with cave openings like dark eyes. Dragons of various sizes around fires. And then, drawn smaller and to one side, a single small dragon with its head tilted, watching the others, always watching, never quite fitting in. She also had another way of sharing things. Cal noticed it first as a faint pressure behind his eyes, like the beginning of a headache that never became one. Then he realized it was not pain, it was image. When Emery wanted to show him something she could not draw, she would go still and look at him steadily, and something would appear in his mind, not in words but in impression and feeling. A cold cave. The smell of smoke. The sound of very large wings. The feeling of being looked at and found wanting. Not memories exactly, but the shape of memories, passed from her to him in some quiet way he could not explain. Through these pictures and drawings and nods and the strange soft impressions she sent, the story came together over those first 2 weeks. Emery was young, the equivalent, Cal judged, of maybe a 6 or 7-year-old child in human terms. She had been born into a dragon community hidden deep in the northern mountains, far from any human settlement. Her people were old, proud, and deeply suspicious of the world outside their peaks. They had a strict order to things, and in that order, asking the wrong questions was treated as a kind of sickness. Emery had always asked the wrong questions. She wanted to know why humans, who were small and short-lived and had no claws or wings, had covered the entire earth and built things that touched the sky. She wanted to know what was inside the towns she could see from high ridges on clear days, the lights and the sounds and the movements that never stopped. The elders called her defective. They said her curiosity was dangerous. And when she kept asking anyway, they decided it was time to send her somewhere far away where her questions could not spread to the younger ones. She had heard them planning it. So she ran. She flew south for 3 nights, staying low and using the cloud cover, until she was close enough to a human settlement to risk coming down. She had watched this area for weeks before making her move, looking for the right person. She had seen Cal tend a hurt hawk, its wing broken, cleaning the wound the same way he later cleaned hers, then letting the bird go when it was ready. She had decided then, if he would do that for a bird, maybe he would do it for something that needed it more. Cal listened to all of this, drawn and pressed and communicated in pieces over many days, without panic and without too many questions. He had seen enough hard things in his life to know that the right response to something impossible was not to argue with it but to deal with it. Emery was here. She was hurt. She was smart and scared and alone. That was what mattered right now. What started to complicate things was his neighbor, Lou Peterson. Lou was a retired mechanic in his 60s, harmless and good-natured, but with the kind of sharp eyes that came from decades of watching engines for signs of trouble. He knocked on Cal's front door on a Thursday morning and stood on the porch with a friendly smile and a slightly puzzled expression, holding a casserole dish his wife had sent over. "Noticed some burn marks on your back fence," Lou said, after the small talk was out of the way. "And something smelled funny last night. Like a campfire, but not wood. You doing some welding back there?" Cal said he had been burning some old brush. Lou nodded, not entirely convinced, but too polite to push further. He handed over the casserole and left. Cal stood at the door and watched him go, then went back inside where Emery was sitting very still under the kitchen table, knowing without being told that she needed to stay quiet and out of sight. She looked at Cal when he came back in. He looked at her. There was a shared understanding in that moment, simple and clear. Things were going to get more complicated before they got simpler. But they were going to handle it together. It started with the deer. 3 of them came out of the tree line one evening, moving fast and nervous, and crossed Cal's back field without stopping, disappearing into the brush on the other side. Emery, who had been sitting near the window, went very still when she saw them. Her amber eyes narrowed. She sent Cal one of her wordless impressions, a shape of warning, heavy and cold. Something large was in the woods. Something that did not belong to those woods. Cal had grown used to reading Emery's silences almost as well as her drawings. He did not ask questions. He went and pulled the curtains on the back windows and turned off the kitchen light, and they sat together in the dark for a while, listening. After an hour, nothing had come to the door and nothing had called out. But in the morning, Cal found 2 sets of marks in the mud at the edge of the tree line, deep, 5-pronged, much larger than anything Emery made, pressed so far down into the ground that they had to belong to something that weighed more than a car. Emery saw the marks when he showed them to her. She crouched down and looked at them for a long time without touching them. When she stood up and looked at Cal, her expression had changed. Not panic, she was too careful for panic, but a new weight had settled into her. She pressed one small claw against his forearm, then drew in the dirt beside the prints, 2 large dragon shapes, and next to them a smaller shape, herself, with a circle around it and a line through the circle. "They have found where I am. They are telling me to come back." The trackers did not attack. They watched. Emery explained, through her drawings and impressions, that this was protocol among her people. Trackers were sent first to find, then to signal, then to wait for a response. If no response came, the next step was a direct approach. And if that failed, she did not finish the image, but Cal understood its shape. He spent a day thinking about it. Then he made a phone call he had been putting off. Leon Graves picked up on the second ring. He and Cal had gone through their army service together and come out the other side as the kind of friends who could go 6 months without talking and pick right back up without any awkwardness. Leon had gone into wildlife biology afterward, working mostly in the northern forests on large animal tracking programs. He was practical, observant, and not prone to falling apart under pressure. "I need you to come out here," Cal said. "I can't explain it on the phone. Just come." Leon arrived the next evening with a bag full of field equipment and the wary expression of a man who knew Cal well enough to know that if Cal said it was unexplainable, it genuinely was. He stood in Cal's kitchen doorway for a solid 30 seconds after seeing Emery, not moving and not speaking. Emery sat on the counter and looked back at him with her head tilted slightly, evaluating. Finally Leon said, very quietly, "She's real." "Very," said Cal. Leon sat down slowly. His scientist brain began working almost immediately, which was what Cal had been counting on. Within an hour, he had his notebook out and was sketching carefully, asking careful questions, keeping himself from reaching out to touch anything without asking first. Emery tolerated his attention with the patience of someone who had decided to trust the person who brought this stranger in. "The wing membrane," Leon said at one point, leaning slightly closer to examine Cal's bandaging. "The structure is closer to a bat than a bird. The attachment point at the shoulder," he stopped himself. "Sorry. I'm doing the thing." "It's fine," Cal said. "Just remember what I told you. She's a kid first." Leon looked at Emery. Emery looked at Leon. Then she picked up a pencil from the counter, the way she had learned to do, and wrote in her careful, unsteady letters on the edge of Leon's notebook, "You study animals?" Leon stared at the words for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to stay level, "Yes, I do." Emery wrote, "I am not an animal." Then, after a pause, she added, "But you can still look." That was the moment Leon fully came on board. The three of them fell into a careful routine over the next week. Cal handled the security of the property. Leon managed the research side, taking careful notes, learning Emery's communication patterns, building a real back and forth with her that went well beyond what Cal had established. And Emery, with 2 attentive adults giving her time and space, began to open up in ways she had not before. Her English improved sharply. She had always understood it well, she had simply not been able to use it. With Leon's patient guidance and Cal's steady presence, she began stringing sentences together, short at first, then longer. She talked about the mountains, about the Elder Council, about the way young dragons were taught that humans were like insects, impressive in their numbers and their busyness, but not worth the risk of contact. She talked about standing at the edge of a high ridge on clear nights and watching the lights of distant towns with a feeling she did not have a word for, a pull toward something she had been told was worthless. While all of this was happening inside the house, something else was happening outside it. 2 strangers had arrived in Grover's Mill. Cal noticed them first at the gas station, a woman in her 40s with a quiet, measured way of moving, and a younger man who was trying too hard to look like he was just passing through. The woman introduced herself to the gas station owner as Diane Ford, doing some environmental survey work in the area. The younger man was Pete Calloway, she said. Her assistant. Cal heard about them from Lou Peterson, who mentioned them in passing. He filed the information away and said nothing. But 2 days later, Diane Ford knocked on his door. She stood on his porch in a plain jacket, no clipboard, no pretense, and looked at him with the kind of eyes that did not waste time. "Mr. Dover," she said, "I'm not here about an environmental survey. I think we both know there's something unusual happening on or near your property. I'd like to talk about it, if you're willing." Cal looked at her for a moment. "How did you find me specifically?" he asked. "Energy signatures," she said. "Biological thermal output inconsistent with local wildlife. And a pattern of behavior from you over the last few weeks that suggests you are protecting something." She paused. "We're not the government. We're not a threat. But there are others looking, and some of them are not as careful as we are." Cal did not let her in. Not yet. But he did not close the door either. He stood in the frame and looked at her and thought about the tracks at the tree line and the deer running scared and the weight of what he was carrying, and he made a decision that he would not fully understand until much later. "Come back tomorrow morning," he said. "Just you, not the young one. And come alone." Diane Ford nodded once. "Thank you," she said, and walked back down the porch steps without looking back. Cal closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. From the kitchen came the quiet sound of Emery scratching a drawing into a spare piece of paper. Calm, focused, unbothered. He walked back in and sat down across from her. She looked up at him and tilted her head. "We're going to have company," he said. "I think it's going to be okay. But we need to be smart about this." Emery looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote, in her steady new handwriting, "You are always smart about things." She paused. Then added, "This is why I chose you." Cal looked at that for a while. Then he got up and made them both something to eat, because that was what you did when the world was getting complicated. You made sure everyone had what they needed for the next thing that was coming. Diane Ford sat at Cal's kitchen table the next morning and told him everything in a steady, unhurried voice. Her organization had no formal name. It had been started decades ago by a small group of people who had stumbled across evidence of dragon existence, not through any grand mission, but through accident and survival. A pilot who had seen something over the northern ridgeline that no one believed. A forest ranger who found tracks and had the sense to photograph rather than report them. A biologist whose research in a remote valley had been quietly, firmly disrupted by something that left no fingerprints and no explanation. These people had found each other over years and built something quiet and careful. Their founding principle, Diane explained, was simple. Do not let either side hurt the other. Not because dragons were harmless, and not because humans were, but because the alternative, a world where both sides became fully aware of each other without any buffer, was a world that ended badly for everyone. Cal listened to all of this. He let her finish. Then he asked his question. "Whose side are you on?" Diane looked at him for a moment. "The side that keeps this from becoming a war," she said. There was no performance in it. It sounded like the truest thing she knew how to say. Cal nodded slowly. He brought Emery in from the back room. Diane looked at Emery with the controlled expression of someone who had prepared for this moment and was keeping their composure through genuine discipline. Emery looked at Diane the way she looked at everything new, measuring, careful, but not unkind. After a moment, Emery held out one small claw, the way she had seen humans extend a hand. Diane reached out and let the tip of that claw rest against her palm for a second. Then they both let go. "She's more comfortable than I expected," Diane said quietly to Cal. "She's been watching people for a long time," Cal said. "She knows what to look for." The arrangement that formed over the following days was informal but solid. Diane and Pete would feed Cal information from outside, what was being tracked, what signals were being picked up, who was moving in the region. Cal, Leon, and Emery would continue as they had been, but now with better information. No one signed anything. No one made promises that were too large to keep. It was the kind of trust that gets built one careful step at a time. The trackers made their move on the 9th night. Cal was on the back porch when he heard them coming. Not through the trees, but from above. A vast slow movement of air that pressed down like weather, like something enormous descending very deliberately. He did not run. He stood up from his chair and stepped off the porch into the back field and looked up. They landed at the far edge of the field, where the grass gave way to the tree-line. Two of them. The largest was the color of dark stone, scaled so heavily its body seemed carved rather than grown. The second was slightly smaller, dark green, and it carried itself with a watchful tension. Their eyes caught the moonlight and held it. They were close enough that Cal could feel the heat coming off their bodies from 20 feet away. They did not attack. They waited. Cal walked toward them. Not fast. Not slow. The same steady pace he used for everything. He stopped about 15 feet away and stood in the field in the dark and looked at them and let them look at him. The larger one spoke first. Not in English. In something deep and layered that Cal felt more than heard, like the sound of a very old building settling. But the words became clear somehow, the way Emery's impressions had become clear, and he understood them. "You shelter one of ours," it said. "This is not your matter." "She came to me," Cal said. "She was hurt and she was afraid. That makes it my matter. She is defective. She does not belong in the world of humans." Return her to us, and this ends here. Cal thought about that for a second. Return her to what? He said. From what she's told me, you were planning to get rid of her. She's a kid. She asks too many questions. That's not a defect, that's just her being herself. He paused. I'm not returning her to anything. If she wants to go, she goes. If she wants to stay, she stays. That's the only deal I have. The two trackers looked at each other. Something passed between them. The larger one turned back to Cal and studied him with those vast lit eyes. Cal had been looked at by a lot of things in his life that were bigger than him and more dangerous. He was still standing. You are not afraid, the dark stone one said. It did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like something being recalculated. I'm a little afraid, Cal said honestly. But being afraid doesn't change what I said. Another long silence. Then the second tracker, the green one, did something unexpected. It spoke in English, rough and accented, but clear. There is a faction among the elders, it said, that wish to hear why she chose a human. This was not something trackers have been asked before. It paused. We were sent to retrieve. But we were also told to listen. Cal understood then that the situation was more complicated than a simple retrieval. There was a split in the Dragon Council, and Emery's choice had landed in the middle of it. Tell them, Cal said, that if they want to hear it, she'll tell them herself. Not through trackers. Directly. When she's ready. On her own terms. He walked back to the house. The trackers did not follow. In the morning, the marks in the field showed where they had been, and then the marks of their departure, enormous and deep and pointing north. Later that morning, Diane came by and Cal told her what had happened. She listened with the careful expression of someone updating a map in their head. This is significant, she said. The trackers being told to listen, that means there's a faction willing to consider something other than containment. That's new. She looked at him steadily. You handled that well. I just talked to them, Cal said. That's what handling it well looks like, she said. That evening, Cal sat with Emery in the kitchen while Leon made coffee. He told her what had been said, the trackers, the faction, the invitation for her to speak for herself. He watched her face as he spoke. Her expression moved through several things, surprise, then something that might have been grief, then something quieter and harder to name. They are afraid, she said finally. Her English was clean now, almost fully formed. That is why they sent me away. Not because I was broken. Because questions make them afraid. She was quiet for a moment. I used to think they were just cruel. But afraid is different. Afraid means there is something they think can be lost. Cal nodded. Does that change anything for you? Emery thought about that for a long time. It changes how I understand it, she said. It does not change what I want. She looked at him. I want to speak to them. Not to go back. But to say what I have seen here. I think someone should say it. Cal looked at her. This small creature who had flown 3 nights through cold dark sky on a hurt wing and left a scroll in a stranger's garden because she was brave enough to hope. Okay, he said. Then we'll make that happen. Outside, the night was quiet. But not as quiet as it used to be. The meeting took place 12 days later, in a wide clearing in the forest north of town, on a cold morning when the fog was still thick between the trees. It was not a grand occasion. There were no flags or ceremonies. Just a group of very different beings standing on the same ground, trying to say true things. Cal stood to one side with Leon and Diane. Pete Calloway stood a little further back, quiet for once, watching. The 2 trackers were there, the dark stone one and the green one, along with a third dragon that none of them had seen before. This one was older than the others, its scales faded to a pale gray at the edges, its eyes slow and considering. It had come down from the north overnight, the trackers had said, carrying the voice of the elder faction that wanted to hear. And Emery stood in the middle of it all, small and very still, her wings folded flat, her amber eyes clear. The gray elder did not speak first. It looked at Emery for a long time. Emery looked back. Cal watched her from the side and thought that she looked more settled than he had ever seen her, not comfortable exactly, but certain. Like someone who had made up their mind about something that mattered. When the elder finally spoke, it was in the layered dragon tongue, and the green tracker translated aloud for the humans. "We sent you away because you were asking the wrong questions," the elder said. "You have had time now among humans. Tell us what you found." Emery was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady and clear, in English, so that everyone present could follow without translation. "I found a man who opened a door," she said. She paused. The fog moved slowly between the trees. "I watched him for weeks before I sent the letter. I was testing him without him knowing. I left signs, small ones, to see how he would react. He found them. He thought about them. He did not call anyone. He did not try to set a trap. He just waited and watched, the same way I was watching." She glanced briefly at Cal, then back to the elder. "When I came to his door hurt and afraid, he stepped aside and let me in. He had no reason to. I had given him nothing. I was nothing to him. But he saw that I needed help, and he helped me." The gray elder waited. The fog settled around them all. "You teach us that humans are dangerous because they take things," Emery continued. "That is true. But this one did not take anything. He was given the chance to use me, to show me, to profit, to be famous, to become powerful with what he knew. He used none of it. When I was hurt, he fixed the wound and did not ask for anything back. When I was afraid, he made me less afraid and did not make me feel small for it." She looked at the elder directly. "You say humans are nothing. But nothing does not do that. Nothing does not choose to treat something weaker than itself with care when there is no reward for doing so. That is not nothing. That is something I do not have a word for in our language, but I have one in theirs. It is called decency." A long silence settled over the clearing. One of the trackers shifted its weight. The gray elder's eyes moved from Emery to Cal and rested on him for a moment. Cal stood still and did not flinch from that look. He let it rest on him. "And you," the elder said through the translator, still looking at Cal, "why did you help her?" Cal thought about the question honestly, the way he thought about all honest questions. "She was small and hurt and she asked for help," he said. "That's enough of a reason." Another silence. Then something happened that none of them expected. The gray elder, the one carrying the weight of a faction, the voice of perhaps the oldest living things on the continent, let out a long, slow breath that made the fog swirl and drift. And in that breath there was something that Diane would later describe as sounding like tiredness. Not weakness. Just the tiredness of something that had been holding a position for a very long time and had finally seen a reason to wonder if the position was right. No treaty was signed that day. No grand alliance was formed. Things did not change overnight, because things of this depth never do. But the gray elder said one thing before rising and turning north: "The matter is not closed. But it is opened." That was all. The trackers left with the elder. The clearing went quiet. Leon let out a very long breath. Pete sat down on a fallen log and looked at his hands. Diane stood with her arms folded and stared at the space where the dragons had been, already thinking about the next steps. Emery walked over to Cal. She stood beside him and looked up at him and said nothing for a moment. "You did well," Cal said. "I said what was true," she said. "That is all I did. That's all you ever need to do." In the weeks that followed, a quiet structure began to form around what had happened in that clearing. Diane's organization became the channel between the two sides, not pushing anything, not rushing anything, just keeping lines open and making sure information moved carefully. The Grey Elders faction did not reach out directly, but there were signs, small ones, that the conversation had not ended. Emery stayed with Cal. Not because she had nowhere to go, and not because she was hiding. She stayed because it was where she had chosen to be, and her choice was respected on both sides. Leon continued his work, learning from her every day, and she learned from him in return, asking the kind of questions that had gotten her exiled from her own people, and finding in this new arrangement a place where those questions were exactly what was needed. Lou Peterson eventually noticed Emery one evening when she was sitting on the back fence watching the sunset. Cal told him the truth, kept simple. Lou stood on the porch for a while, looked at Emery, looked at Cal, and said, "Well, all right then." Then he went home and came back the next day with a larger casserole dish than before. Cal's life did not become loud or famous. He did not become a symbol or a figure in any story that anyone else would tell. He was still the man at the end of the road with the creaky porch and the garden and the old radios. But he was also, now, something else, a point of trust between two kinds of people who were still figuring out whether they could live in the same world without destroying each other. On a quiet evening in late autumn, Cal was sitting on the back porch when Emery came and perched on the fence beside him. The light was going, the sky turning the deep gold and gray that came just before dark. Her wings caught the last of it and shimmered faintly. They sat together in easy silence for a while. Then Emery said, without looking at him, "Why did you open the door that first night? You did not know what I was. You could not have known I was safe." Cal thought about it. Truly thought about it, the way she deserved. "You knocked," he said. Emery was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked at him with her amber eyes, warm as always, full of everything she had survived and everything she had chosen and everything she still intended to ask. "That was enough," she said. "For me it was," Cal said. The dark came in soft and slow around them. The stars appeared one at a time. Somewhere far to the north, in mountains that most maps did not show, something very old was thinking about what a small dragon had said in a fog-filled clearing, and what a human had done without being asked, and whether the world it had always believed in was exactly the shape it had always assumed. It was not a revolution. It was not a war. It was not a discovery that changed everything in one bright sudden moment. It was something smaller and harder to name, a door left open, a question still being asked, a beginning that was not trying to be more than a beginning. And sometimes, that is exactly what the world needs most.